Yeah, he's doing all.
We're gonna get started in the next 5 minutes or so. If you haven't grabbed pizza already, it's out in the lobby area, and we'll get started in a bit.
Okay, let me make sure yours is on here. North handheld. Okay, yours should be on now.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay. So no one you want me to go? Okay. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Rory Stewart. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is titled "This Concerns You" and is presented in partnership with the ASUU Sustainability Board. I want to briefly introduce our guests. So first we'll have Senator Nate Bluin, which he will be here in a bit, represents Utah's 13th Senate District, a position he has held since 2023. Dr. Brian Monek, is the founder and president of the Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. And next, Darren Perry is the former chairman of the Shoshone Nation. He is also an author and speaker on subjects including Native American history and sustainability. And lastly, Alta Fairborn is a community water organizer with the Utah Rivers. There, she supports campaigns through legislative advocacy, grassroots organizing, and engagement with the community. I will now turn it over to Grace of the ASUU Sustainability Board to get us started. So please join me in welcoming our guests.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for attending. I'm really excited for the conversation we're about to have. So first off, I'd like to briefly explain the current state of the Great Salt Lake so that we all can be familiar with what is going on. So the Great Salt Lake is the largest saline lake in the Western Hemisphere. It has no outlet, and the water that comes to the Great Salt Lake is from the Bear, Weber, and Jordan River. This is a huge hotspot for migratory birds. Hundreds of thousands of birds visit the Great Salt Lake and its wetlands annually. We also have a brine shrimp industry in the Great Salt Lake that is a $10 to $60 million industry. The lake is so salty that large parts of it won't freeze during the winter, and the lake is how we get that lake effect snow for skiing. It acts as a refresher to storms that are rolling in towards the Wasatch Mountains. And currently, the Great Salt Lake is projected to reach the lowest level in November of this year, and it is currently at 36% capacity. And right now, I would like to take time for each of the panelists to introduce themselves, the work that they do, and how it is connected to the Great Salt Lake. Darren, if you'd like to start.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. And so I'm Darren Perry, former chairman of the Shoshone Nation. I teach in the fall here, though. I teach a class called Indigenous Land Stewardship, and I have a couple of students. And so sign up for it next fall. Shameless plug. But my Shoshone creation story started at Antelope Island. And so it's an important part of my life and always has been. As soon as I could remember, my grandmother would take me there and plant walk and do other things. And so being able to teach another way to look at the problem from an indigenous perspective has been a huge part of why I do the work that I do. And so I think being able to help college students understand that and their role going forward, because at the end of the day, it's your future and nobody else's.
Thank you. And Dr. Brian Mensch?
Thank you. I'm Dr. Brian Mensch, president of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, one of the largest civic organizations of healthcare professionals in the Western United States. We're interested in the outcome of the Great Salt Lake battle for multiple reasons, but primarily because of the public health impacts. A lot of you have heard about the possibility of the Great Salt Lake disappearing and leaving a toxic dust bowl. Well, one of the things I hope to accomplish here today is explain to you why that's the case. Our environmental group is one of the 5 groups that are suing the state of Utah to try and force their hand in delivering more water to the lake. And one of the reasons why we're one of the plaintiffs in that lawsuit is because we just didn't see a pathway, given the disposition of the legislature, to saving the lake. So we decided we better take our issue to the courts and see if we couldn't force their hand. And so we're heavily engaged in the issue. It has tremendous economic and public health impacts, and I hope to explain some of that today.
Alta?
Hi, my name is Alta Fairborn. I'm a recent U of U alumni, so it's always awesome to be back here. I am an activist at Utah Rivers Council, and we are an advocacy nonprofit advocating to conserve Utah's rivers and the ecosystems and communities that our rivers support, which water supports everything, and so water is kind of connected to everything. And we're the second driest state in the country. And so as we face a future of climate change and growth, water is a really, really important issue for Utah. And so we kind of been working on all things water. And for the Great Salt Lake, like Grace said, it's fed by 3 main rivers. It doesn't have a river outlet. It only loses water through evaporation. So the key to preserving the Great Salt Lake is to conserve its rivers. Perfect timing.
Hi, welcome Senator Nate Bluen.
Hey.
It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
I just asked each of the panelists to introduce the work that they do and how it is in connection to the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, so I served in the state Senate for 4 years now, have run legislation, I think every year, at least 3 out of the 4 years I've been up there on Great Salt, I think every year actually, on Great Salt Lake. I mean, this has been a critical issue for us for a long time, but it came more into the consciousness in the last, decade or even 5 years. And so really promoting this from the platform I have has been so important. We need to make sure that we are addressing the critical issues with the urgency that is needed. I think this is one of the top challenges that we face right now as a local community, as far as things that are going to directly impact our quality of life, our public health, and our economy, frankly. This is at the very top of the list, and so trying to put some pressure on from inside the system as a legislator who's up against tall odds in the state Senate has been a big part of my work. And so anything I can do to keep elevating this issue, to keep trying to push for policies that are actually going to help move us in the right direction, to create a narrative that so many people are coming up is really important. It's been awesome to work with folks on this panel and also a lot of young people to put forward legislation that is going to address the lake. And I think that's really critical, that we look at the next generation that are coming up that are going to be impacted, to make sure that we have the right voices at the table.
Right, thank you so much. All right, my first question is to Darren Perry. In a recent article published by the Salt Lake Tribune, you brought up the idea to create a Great Salt Lake intertribal coalition. What would it take for this coalition like this to be created, and what efforts would be made by this coalition to bring the Great Salt Lake to a healthier condition?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm not holding out any hope that we're going to create this coalition, but it would be important if we did. To create it, we'd have to have buy-in from the state and other major players in this system, and for some reason they don't want to engage indigenous communities. But I think what's really critical in all of this, and I think what we could do as an intertribal coalition, getting the 8 indigenous tribes in Utah to come together as they always have done, I think we need to reframe the problem. We're always talking about how do we fix the lake? How do we keep this Great Salt Lake from drying up? But maybe the question needs to be, how do we restore our relationship to the lake? Because that then changes the equation. It recenters what we're talking about. And now we're looking at the lake not as a resource that we can extract, deplete, develop, use, divert, but we look at it as a relative that we nurture and care for. We need to advocate, and I think tribes would be a great job in doing this, is to advocate for water stewardship that's rooted in balance, doing all things in balance. Natives talk about balance a lot, and so that's a critical piece. Another would be, and this makes me crazy, there's a this traditional ecological knowledge that has been around for thousands of years, but somehow we dismiss it like it's maybe old-fashioned or not relevant for today's topic. But that traditional ecological knowledge that existed from time immemorial is how Native peoples have managed and lived in this environment going forward. And then we've got to really engage everybody. Everybody needs to be involved in this in some way to have a stake in their future. And I think the last thing that intertribal coalition will do is really emphasize 7 generations ahead. Don't make any decisions at the legislative level or any other level without considering what that effect, that decision would have on 7 generations down the road. Could you imagine every one of our decisions if we thought about that? If we didn't think short term, we thought, you know, if we do this, what's it going to do to our kids and our grandkids and their kids? And then I promise you there are certain things we wouldn't do because of it. So I think engaging in a community that's been around for a long, long time in a way that reframes the problem. We take care of our relatives, don't we? If it's a commodity that we can buy or sell, make a profit off of, not so much. So we need to reframe the problem.
Thank you so much for that insight. I have a question for Dr. Brian Mensch. Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment are frontiers in bringing awareness and advocacy to the public concerning the health impacts of the community. The dust coming from the sediment of the Great Salt Lake is a growing concern for our air quality. For those of us who are not aware of the consequences from the dust blowing into the Salt Lake Valley, could you provide a summary of what those health consequences could be?
Well, when we heard news reports over the last several years that the Great Salt Lake dust may be toxic to human health, may contain a lot of arsenic, we started thinking amongst our group that that doesn't really tell the story. So we decided to spend the last 18 months really digging into the medical literature. And we produced a report about 100 pages long with over 500 references that really gives the most comprehensive information about what's really in the lake that is found anywhere now. And frankly, we were very shocked at what we found. The health hazard is underanalyzed, under-researched, and under-reported. It's much worse than what people know about. And if I were to give you a soundbite, it would be all the toxic byproducts of modern civilization are in the lake and the lake bed. Now, why is that? Well, probably number one, there are 28 sewage treatment plants that discharge into the Great Salt Lake, either the lake itself or its tributaries. So you think of everything that is in municipal sewage, there it is. The Kennecott mine operation has been going on for about 120 years. So all the heavy metal, toxic heavy metals beyond the copper that it produces are part of the discharge both into our air and to the lake. MAG Corporation has been operating since the mid-1970s, producing some of the most toxic industrial chemicals that we know of, like dioxins and furans, and that's getting into the lake. We've been obviously part of the Great Basin exposure to nuclear weapons testing. We know radionuclides are in that lake and in the lake bed. We've measured it, we know that. Things like strontium, yttrium, tritium. Radionuclides are found in the furnace fillers of people who live along the Wasatch Front, especially on the east side. We know there are natural pathogens there, things like cyanotoxins, things like fragments of bacterial cell membranes, which have been studied in other parts of the world and found to be extremely toxic to the lungs. The lake ecosystem is being plastered with pesticides. Now, there's some honorable, if you will, goals in spraying herbicides to get rid of the Phragmites, the invasive weeds around the lake. But nobody should be under any illusion that that comes risk-free. Those pesticides are toxic to human health, toxic to wildlife, and there's a real cost to be paid if we're going to do that. And then there are the things like the industrial chemicals, the byproducts of fossil fuel combustion from traffic, industrial smokestacks, that's all in there. And then we even have what we know to be chemical interactions between the dust and the regular urban air pollution that we're familiar with, creating new chemicals that we didn't even know existed. So it's a toxic soup that if we were to look at what's happening in other parts of the world, and the best analog is what's going on with the Aral Sea in Uzbekistan. It's now 10% of its original size, the 4th largest inland lake in the world. The population around the Aral Sea, the life expectancy has dropped 13 years. Now, that doesn't mean everybody here is going to die 13 years earlier, but that gives you a broad overview of what kind of public health consequence we're talking about if we let the Great Salt Lake dry up.
Thank you very much for all of that information. It's very eye-opening. Thank you. And to Alta Fairborn. The Great Salt Lake condition is drastic and calls for drastic measures to be taken to bring back its healthy state. Utah Rivers Council has published Project 4200, which brings into light the amount of water needed to reach that goal. To shed light on the situation, what is the amount of water needed and how long will it take for the Great Salt Lake to reach a healthy state?
Yeah, it's a great question. Every time I hear Dr. Mensch talk about the dust, I'm like a little bit overwhelmed by how serious of an issue that we're in at the Great Salt Lake. A lot of lakebed dust is already exposed, and we are on track to hit a new record low this year, especially with this snowpack. This is a drastic and serious crisis that we are facing in northern Utah, and we need big policy change. I think that what the Utah legislature has done thus far is akin to putting Band-Aids over a bullet hole and then saying we've fixed you, like you're not going to bleed out and die. This is still an active crisis, and we need a lot of water. But I don't think that the policy changes that are needed are like draconian. We don't need to dry up every single farm in Utah. We don't need to get rid of every single piece of grass. Guys, Utah is the highest per person municipal water user in the country. We are still flood irrigating ornamental turf that's only touched by a lawnmower. Is it so draconian and drastic to ask the Utah State House to switch over our secondary water to municipal water? Is it so draconian to ask the Utah legislature to stop using 19th century archaic water delivery systems to flood irrigate alfalfa? Like, is it so draconian to ask the Utah legislature to phase out the use of property taxes to subsidize water waste? The biggest water user in Salt Lake City is the University of Utah, and they're not paying their fair share of how much it costs for water because of the way we fund water. And so it is a huge crisis, but I also want people to know that there are low-hanging common sense policy solutions for water in Utah that the Utah legislature is failing to consider. So how much water do we need? From that record low, which is 4189, we're around 4190, 4191 right now. We would need around 8.4 million acre feet of water, which is a hard number to put into perspective for a lot of us. If we completely abandon the Great Salt Lake Basin, it would take 4.5 years to refill the Great Salt Lake if we just let our rivers flow into the lake for 4.5 years. So this is going to take a really, really long time. If we wanted to save the Great Salt Lake, say, in 20 years, we would need a roughly 800,000 additional acre feet of water every single year in additional water inflow to the Great Salt Lake to save the Great Salt Lake in 20 years. 800,000. The Utah legislature has allocated an additional 70,000 acre feet of additional water inflow, and that figure is not even permanent. So we have not even begun delivering enough water to the Great Salt Lake to halt its ongoing decline, let alone start refilling it by the Olympics. This is obscene. We need a lot of water, but there are common sense solutions for water in Utah. And the more we get organized around spreading the message about water in Utah and we come together, we join groups, we become advocates in our communities, there's definitely hope for the Great Salt Lake. It's not going to take these crazy huge solutions, but we do need more.
Thank you so much for answering that, Alta. I think it's really important for us to recognize that the solutions are in our hands and that we have the power to do it. And it's easier than how it seems. Senator Nate Lewin, a question for you. During the previous legislative session, you sponsored Senate Bill 250 in efforts to allocate funding of programs to distribute water to the Great Salt Lake. This bill had lots of support by the local community, but it ultimately did not pass. What exactly did this bill propose, and what happened within our local government that caused it not to pass? And with that, do you see any barriers that prevent our government from implementing actual change?
Yeah, this is a great follow-on to the discussion that Alta just started. So, and Alta was helpful on that bill. Utah Rivers Council was involved in working on SB 250, along with a number of youth coalitions and great advocates from a wide range of spaces. It was a really simple bill, and I think that goes to some of the questions and the answers that were just given. Is like, this is not that complex of a problem to solve. It's not like climate change. It's not like some of these gigantic things with millions of variables. It is literally just like, here's one basin, we need to find some water. This year there's not much water, but usually there's enough water to actually get at the problem if we push the solutions in the right direction. And so SB 250 was about deauthorizing the Bear River development, which is about taking more water out of the Bear River, which is the largest tributary to the Great Salt Lake, correct? Yeah. And we can't afford to take more out. After what we just heard, obviously taking more out and storing it in other places upstream is not going to help us get water to the lake. It's the exact opposite of that. So we need to deauthorize that. Even the Speaker of the House in Utah has said he thinks it's time for Bear River to be off the table, but the legislature wouldn't move it forward. On top of that, the bill would have proposed, or did propose, and would have implemented, it would have moved $200 million of existing funding. It would not have increased taxes or incoming revenues or anything. It just would have moved $200 million from the Bear River account to, or an account focused on Bear River, to the Great Salt Lake account, so that we could have looked for water leases and purchasing water rights and measuring and monitoring and doing all the things we're going to need to do to actually get those flows moving to Great Salt Lake. And so it's so important that we recognize that funding is a big piece of it, but we also need a lot of regulations that are going to move us in the right direction too. We need to make sure that we are focused on Endangered Species Act and not undercutting some of the work being done there, which some folks are trying to do in Congress, and I'm running for Congress. I look forward to addressing these issues head on in DC, because this is going to be a problem that requires federal solutions. Trump talked about $1 billion. I'm very skeptical of what that's going to do or how that's going to come into Utah. But certainly if we can find $1 billion here and $1 billion there, that will start to address the scale of this problem. It is going to take, I don't know what the going rate for water leases are. I talked about this with the Great Salt Lake Commissioner several weeks ago, but $200 million would have made a little bit of a dent, but it would have been nowhere near the 800,000 acre feet per year that we need. So that is just a small part of the problem. So we need to get the young folks involved who are going to be impacted, the tribes that have the knowledge that Darren has talked about, the public health folks who certainly know about the impacts here to our communities. And we had people coming up and speaking on this bill and showing support, and they were getting emails back from members of the committee that was held up in that said, we don't really care about your input, we just care about the input of the large water users who are going to be impacted by this. Is that fair to say? Something along? Yeah, it was ridiculous. We should be looking to our constituents, to the people that are impacted, not only focusing on the economic interest here, which really in this circumstance is big agriculture. We cannot address this problem without taking on alfalfa and the 75% of water in the basin that goes to agricultural use. So that's the start of it to me, looking at those issues, making sure we're not undercutting regulations that we do have, and finding the funding to actually get things moving in the right direction. And this would have been a piece of that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I personally participated in some of the rallies that were happening around Senate Bill 250, so it's pretty interesting to see our local government, not listening to the people. All right, and question for Darren Perry. During much of your public speaking, you discuss a fundamental part of advocating for land is creating relationships and memories with that land. What is a memory that has shaped how you value the Great Salt Lake? And what advice would you give to a person who has never seen the Great Salt Lake?
I mean, my earliest memories are going on plant walks with my grandmother down to Antelope Island. And I grew up in Syracuse, so I was right on the doorstep of Antelope Island every day. I heard the Shoshone creation story that incorporates the Great Salt Lake and Antelope Island in that. But when you grow up as a small child and your grandmother is showing you the different plants that are there and singing the songs of the plants, and then before we left, she always sang a healing song to Grandmother Lake, is how she called it. You just grow up with a different sense of responsibility. You grow up thinking that what you're looking at here is a relative that should be nurtured and cared for with as much care as you would a relative, a sick relative today. But we need to be able to move beyond all of those things. You guys, it's not a science problem. It's a values problem.
Yeah.
All the science in the world won't make up for our selfish behaviors. And so we need to reframe how we look at the issue. And getting back in tune with nature, living in a relational, I call it relational resilience. It's tough when you hook yourself to it, then our decisions are different. And so get out there, take a look. Even from the smallest gnat, which is probably pretty crazy right now, to the bison, to everything. The ecosystem out there is fantastic. Mm-hmm. And not saving it is not an option.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's, when addressing this issue, it's so interesting to talk with local Utahns and learn how few of us have actually gone and visited the Great Salt Lake, you know, and you see pictures of it and compare and contrast how it once was and how it is now. And I think, you know, people being able to give themselves the opportunity to connect with the Great Salt Lake and witness firsthand what's going on, that's so important in this movement. Mm-hmm.
How do you care for something you don't have a relationship with? Yeah. I mean, think about that just statement right there. How do you care for something that you do not have a relationship with? And let that be your focus.
Thank you so much. And to Dr. Brian Mensch, what can Utahns do to protect themselves against the health consequences we face while living in an environment that is prone to Great Salt Lake toxic dust being in the air? What can someone do to make the most impact in advocating for cleaner air and helping their community?
Well, improving the situation has two different limbs to it. One is what can you do with your own individual behavior to protect yourself and your family? That's one thing. The other thing is what can you do to improve the community at large? And those are two different tracks. Let me first address the track on improving the community at large. I have this somewhat naive, maybe optimistic notion that the legislature can only hold off public opinion with a stiff arm so long. Eventually, they have to give in. Now, I've spent some disappointing hours up at the legislature just in the last month, talking to some legislators who I would kindly say have science derangement syndrome.
Not me, right?
Definitely not me. By the way, did you all see Senator Bluen on Rachel Maddow on Monday?
It was awesome.
He was wonderful. To Darren's point, it is a value problem. But you still have to understand and respect the science. If you don't respect the science, that is a value problem. And so it's tough to talk to legislators who put science in a box of, we don't have to go there because it conflicts with our, and I will say this kindly, mercenary objectives. And that's almost always what it is. It's a conflict between people who want to make money and a conflict between those people and between people who want to protect public health, science, the environment, and so forth. So that's one problem. So I would just say public pressure in every way possible. Protests, writing letters, calling your legislator, everything. I have been told years ago that if a legislator gets 10 calls from his constituents, then they start to pay attention, his or her, sorry. If they get maybe 15, 20 calls, then they start to think about writing a bill. It's unfortunate to think that legislators have their own agenda, which they do, but there is a limit to how much they can continue to stiff-arm the public. So that kind of pressure works, get engaged in it. Now, as far as your own personal health goes, how many of you have an air purifier in your home? If you have an air purifier in your home, put it in your bedroom where you spend most of your time. If you don't have an air purifier, you can make one yourself with components from Home Depot for about 40 or 50 bucks. If you put an air purifier in your bedroom, you can at least have clean air regardless of what the pollution source may be, whether it's the Great Salt Lake, whether it's traffic pollution, smokestack, or whatever. We actually have studies that show people have better cognitive function the morning that they wake up if they've had an air purifier in their bedroom during the night. So that's just an example of many things you can do in your own personal life. I know this sounds kind of corny, but when it comes to the physiology of why does air pollution harm public health, and a summary would be it does all the same things that smoking cigarettes does, because that's just a different kind of pollution. And it's not that much difference in terms of quantity, because a cigarette smoker maybe smokes 20 cigarettes a day. They're smoking a cigarette maybe once an hour, something like that. But they're not smoking 24/7. But an air pollution breather, all of you, is breathing air pollution 24/7. And so that's why the medical research on what's the difference between the health consequences of smoking versus community air pollution, it's not that great. It's not anywhere near as great as you think. So I'll just mention one other corny thing. It's a battle between antioxidants and free radicals. And if you remember anything about chemistry, you know what a free radical is. It's an atom with an unpaired electron in its outer orbit. And it's unstable, and it tries to make other molecules next to it unstable. Antioxidants are the opposite. They try and scavenge those things. So a diet that is very strong in antioxidants actually will help minimize the chronic inflammatory response that air pollution triggers, regardless of what the source, whether it's the Great Basin or the Great Salt Lake drying up or any other source of air pollution. So those are just two things. You can make a difference in your personal life. You can help the entire community with your activism.
Thank you so much for all that information. If I could add one more question, how do you see masks, like N95 masks, playing a part in that role?
They're pretty effective. Now, I will say, having been, pardon my camouflage outfit, by the way, the bicycle commuter has to prioritize being seen by drivers. That's kind of the number one rule of survival. So that's why I'm wearing my camouflage outfit. I have bicycled to work for about 16 years. I've tried to bicycle uphill in an N95 mask. It's not easy. No. But they are very effective in terms of limiting the amount of pollution that you inhale. So, yeah, when the air pollution is significant, I would recommend wearing an N95 mask. When the PM 2.5 is in the high yellow to orange category, they can be very helpful. That's kind of like your own air purifier that I just talked about a few minutes ago. So, yeah, that's worth doing.
Great. Thank you so much for all that information. I think it's good to know and remember that we have power in not only protecting ourselves, but our community as well when it comes to this air pollution. All right, and a question to Alta Fairborn. Over the years, you have spent much of your time advocating for the Great Salt Lake. As the community water organizer for Utah Rivers Council, have you seen any changes in our community's involvement to advocate for the Great Salt Lake? For someone who doesn't know how to get involved, what would be the first step?
Yeah. To answer the first question, I definitely have been seeing change, a lot of positive change. I think a lot of people are becoming really aware of the declining Great Salt Lake, which has been great. But one of the biggest changes, which gives me a lot of hope, is there's been a lot of hype coming out of the Utah State House about their grand plans to save the Great Salt Lake. And without a critical eye, it can feel really self-assuring that, there's people coming to save us. We don't have to change our personal values. We don't have to change our personal habits. We don't have to be advocates because, the government cares. They're coming to save us. And I think that's kind of pacified this fiery public resistance that I truly believe that we need to save the Great Salt Lake. And I'm starting to see the public wake up to the propaganda that the state of Utah has a plan to save the Great Salt Lake and that they are doing everything that they should and can to save the Great Salt Lake. I think that the national scheme of politics has helped with that a lot. I think people are starting to wake up to whoa, the system is broken and it's not serving us, and we need to grassroots organize to create change. For the second question, and I love that this conversation about values has been brought up, because values matter a lot in deciding kind of what tribe we want to join. So when you're thinking about how can I show up for the Great Salt Lake, what can I do to make a difference? First of all, do not become demoralized by your perceived lack of expertise or your perceived lack of power. Every single person in this room is immensely powerful. Every single thing that you do in public and private life matters, and it creates cultural impact and change. You are simultaneously an individual, but you're also simultaneously the collective. So everything you do matters. Okay, so first, that's what I would say. Second thing I'd say is, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of organized groups who are already advocating for the Great Salt Lake, and the best thing to do is to probably join one of those groups. And that's why values are so important, because just because someone has Great Salt Lake in their title doesn't mean that we all share values. Every single group operates in a lot of different ways, and so I would delineate what your values are. Utah Rivers Council, we believe in integrity. We believe in telling the truth no matter what all of the time. We believe that ethical courage is important to upholding integrity. We believe in equity and compassion for all living beings. We believe nature has the right to exist despite its usefulness to humans. We believe in dissent. We believe in utilizing every single branch of government to influence change. And I could literally share all of our values with you, and you can see where you fit in. Living in alignment with your values is super, super, super important for not only your personal mental health, but also for social change. So delineate what matters to you and try and strive to live in alignment with your values no matter what all of the time. I promise it is the most personally freeing thing in the world, and you will unlock this intuition that will just improve your mental health in magical ways. But yeah, join an organization, start organizing your own communities, spread the word about the Great Salt Lake. Hopefully that wasn't too wordy, but yeah.
Clap for that.
That was beautifully said. Thank you so much. All right. I think it is kind of hard and can be intimidating, to make that first step and
sure.
and recognize that you do have a voice and you can make change, But it is so important to realize, any small effort that you make, it goes a long way.
Also, I brought a sign-up sheet, so if you are interested in volunteering, that's Aiden, my awesome colleague Aiden. He has a sign-up sheet, so you guys can come find us after, get you connected.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alta. All right, and to Senator Nate Bluen, for a person wanting to start advocating to help the Great Salt Lake, what would be the most impactful way they connect with their local government to make a difference?
Join Utah Rivers Council. This is a great panel. Normally I'll find something I disagree with, but I have not heard anything on this panel that I disagree with. So kudos to everyone here. As far as getting involved with government, I mean it's harder because this is a big issue with a lot of big players. The water conservation districts, the brine shrimp industry, the mineral extraction industry. They all have a very big voice in what happens here, and those are the folks that are given seats at the table in the commissions and the boards and all the governmental institutions that play a role in the lake. And so I've been frustrated that it's not groups like Utah Rivers Council, like Physicians for a Healthy Environment, like folks like Darren. You might have gotten invited to some of those. Is that
Every now and then.
occasionally? Okay, yeah.
Not ever to make a decision, though.
Right. And we
The
need
token
those.
Indian.
Yeah. And it needs to be more than token. It's like real input from real people that know what they're doing, that know what they're talking about, that are impacted by this, not just the economic stakeholders. And so it makes it really, really difficult for people to get involved with this from a governmental aspect. So I think it is really important to have good groups that people can join that really do show up and advocate. And like Alta said, there's a number of groups involved. I find myself to be very aligned with all of the values that she just listed off there, because I think we need to speak truth to power on this issue. We are not being listened to by state government and by other decision makers here. People are not being heard, and it's so important that our health is impacted and we have a voice, and that everyone in this room has a voice. And that takes organization, and that takes people coming together and speaking with collective power, and the government's not super good about leveraging that. So it's good to have these groups that are going to put pressure on. There are some groups that are working kind of more behind the scenes in a little bit nicer way. I'm not known for being super nice myself to like the state government, and you know, I think we need that pressure from the outside, and I get to play the inside role too, and to say, look, this is what I'm hearing from my constituents who are actually impacted. So make sure you reach out to elected officials. I think it was Dr. Mensch was saying, you know, for every email we get, you know, it puts a little more pressure on people to act, and it takes a lot for some people. It takes a lot to get them activated and thinking about an issue, particularly when, you know, we have legislators from around the state who feel like the Great Salt Lake is getting all the attention. I hear this all the time. I'm like, well, yeah, the Great Salt Lake exists, but, you know, what about my little reservoir in my backyard? And I'm like, man, I'm sorry, but like that's not impacting 1.5 million people or whatever. It's just not the same scale. This is where our population center is, and our voices get left out so much just based off of like who chairs some of these committees that legislation related to Great Salt Lake comes from. I mean, these are rural folks. Nothing against rural folks whatsoever. We need our agriculture to do better and to be around and to be able to make a return on their investment. But I mean, it is pitting directly their profits and their ability to make a living against our health here in Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County. And so we need to speak up against that and say, look, you need to listen to the people who are actually impacted by this. And I just see that happening so infrequently, and we get trampled over by other interests. So coming together, finding ways to get involved, showing up to committee meetings during the legislative session and outside of session when there's multiple task forces, again, that people sit on that don't represent our community. And so to have voices there that can speak up for folks that are going to be experiencing the dust and the decline and all of that is really important. And it's hard to always find a way, but there are opportunities. So follow groups like Utah Rivers Council to get notified of when those happen.
Can I just add one other thought along this theme? It's a false dichotomy to say that we have to prioritize our economy or the environment. They're very much one and the same.
Yep.
You look at where lakes like this have been dried up, in the RLC, I mentioned that. A lot of you don't know the fact that one of the reasons why the population in Iran was so energized in protesting a couple of months ago before this war was started is because they have mismanaged Lake Urmia, much like we've mismanaged the Great Salt Lake. And water has become so scarce in their populated areas that it's almost more expensive than oil. So it has profound societal consequences in Iran, and we may experience the same thing too, but it has profound economic consequences as well. So the idea that it's either the economy or the environment is a false dichotomy, and we need to get over that. They go together.
Our home values are going to plummet if we can't live all of our real estate values are done if we can't have a thriving economy here in our own neighborhood, right? And that's just one example. I mean, it is totally true.
And also in that dust report Dr. Mensch spoke on, we also did an analysis, Utah Rivers Council did an analysis of how much it's going to cost Utah taxpayers to mitigate dust. Billions and billions and billions of dollars. Like Owens Lake dried up, like outside of LA, not even close to metropolitan areas like the Great Salt Lake is. And they've spent $2.5 billion mitigating dust there over the last 20 or so years, but it's 1/16 the size of the Great Salt Lake. So super expensive.
Let me just add one other statistic on this idea of the economy and public health. In matters of, say, regulations from the EPA and the Clean Air Act, it has been determined that the costs of regulations to industry are paying off in terms of reduced costs in public health to the tune of about 30-1. So the idea that we can't afford to protect our environment, we can't afford clean air because of the cost, that is completely ignoring all of the clear empirical evidence that the opposite is true. The more we protect our environment, the more we get a return on that investment, and that investment largely is about, if you take it across the board, is about 30-1. How many other public investments can pay off like that? Hardly any.
Thank you. I love this conversation that we've been having here. I have one more question to finish off, to finish the questions I have prepared. And this is addressed to all panelists. The current situation of the Great Salt Lake can be quite overwhelming. I'm sure you all feel a little bit overwhelmed right now. How do you, as a person advocating for change, deal with the emotional strain you may have experienced while doing your advocating and work? Darren, if you'd like to start.
Last Friday, we had the spring equinox, perfect light and dark. But in my community and the way I was raised, I look at life in cycles and seasons. There's a season of growth, there's a season of rest. And I've really tried to incorporate that into my work with the Great Salt Lake. We can't go 1,000 miles an hour all day, every day. A fatigue sets in, and we're not built that way anyway. So take time, take a season of your life to recoup and regenerate. But that's the time we plan and get together with like-minded people and say, what are we going to do, a couple of months down the road when it's time? Let's organize. Let's become effective that way. And take the downtime to just let yourself decompress from the whole situation. And then attack mode and go hard. And then, like the seasons, and we've missed most of the seasons this year, straight from fall to summer. And so, but don't stress about it. Know that everything happens when it's supposed to happen, and take the time to do that.
Thank you very much. And Brian?
Well, I'm going to get a little personal here. 8 of my 14 immediate family members have had cancer, including me twice. 2 of my children. I held my daughter's hand on her 27th birthday as she was wheeled into the operating room for a double mastectomy for breast cancer. Air pollution is one of the causes. I don't care what legislators who say, oh, Dr. Mintz, you don't know what you're talking about, because I found on a website that they didn't mention air pollution as a cause of breast cancer. 80 to 90% of cancer is environmentally triggered. It only takes one cell to not do its job to trigger a cancer, just one cell. Now, genetics makes up the balance, but that's only 10 to 15% of causes of cancer. So when the majority of my family has had cancer, I can look at their faces and sometimes look myself in the mirror and see the consequences of our environmental degradation. It's real. It's causing people great harm. It's shortening lives. It's causing misery. It's causing family tragedy. It must be addressed, or it will never get any better. You think about your own family and all the kinds of disease potential that there may be as you get older, heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, all that stuff. That's all of it somewhat triggered, in many cases, a lot of it triggered by environmental degradation, including our air pollution, including the disappearing Great Salt Lake. So it's personal, it's real, it has consequences to everybody here, including shortening your life expectancy and those you love.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. It certainly is a lot. A lot of these environmental issues are interconnected, and what's happening at the Great Salt Lake isn't the issue in itself. It's the symptom of water mismanagement in the West for a really, really long time. Mm-hmm. You know, where we've perceived water conservation as the building of new pipes and dams and reservoirs and not cutting back and scaling back. And so it's all interconnected. And sometimes when I get into that moment where I'm like, oh, it's all interconnected, there's so many issues, you know, it can be really, really stressful. But I have found that advocacy, being an activist, being a community organizer is an immense privilege, and it doesn't cause me like more undue stress. I'm coming from a position of great privilege, and I am extremely grateful to not only have gotten my college education, but also working in a career that is empowering and that I'm passionate about. Like, it's not causing me an undue amount of emotional stress compared to the communities and the people who are being disproportionately impacted by these issues. And so I think it's important for me to first off say that. But action is the secret sauce to happiness in a world that feels on fire. It's not what causes me stress, it's what helps me in my emotional stress. Like, resistance, action, activism, whatever you want to call it, is super important in empowering myself to feel better. Like, taking wins. Like, we killed 2 really bad bills this last legislative session, and taking wins is how I deal with my emotional stress. Like 501 and 198. Remember, yeah.
Taxes.
No, they wanted to build a new Bureau of Reclamation type government office.
Okay.
And you asked, anyways, yeah, we're going back.
They all
come together, yeah, the bill numbers mesh together. But taking wins, like being strategic and dedicated and then seeing a win is awesome. That's the best feeling in the world. What we do is very, very empowering, and I'm very lucky. So I would say live in alignment with your values helps a lot. I think the resistance to suffering causes like a unique type of suffering when like staring hard truths in the face, sitting with them and trying to do something about it makes you feel better than not doing anything.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that, so I'll like tie it together. I think what Darren said about resting and strategizing is critical, and also and the personal experiences are really important. Both of my parents have had cancer. My mom's going through it right now, and you can't pin it on one thing or the other, but it certainly seems very likely that living in a world like we do, that is being driven by things like the dust coming off Great Salt Lake. And I'm always just so happy to see Alta out here like being extremely passionate. I've worked in spaces that I feel passionate about. I worked in clean energy prior to serving in the legislature, and it was fun every day to go to work. And so I would just say, folks who, you're up here getting an education, to the best of your extent. Obviously, money matters. You got to make a living to be able to do the things you like to do. But if you can find a job and a career and things that you actually enjoy showing up for that are aligned with your values, it definitely helps. It is awesome to see people excited about what they're doing, focusing on these important causes. And for me, I mean, I care about the environment. I care about a bunch of other things. Running for office is a lot of fun because I get to dive into all these different issues that are impacting folks. But it's so important at the same time to have those moments of rest. The reason I care so much about Great Salt Lake and the environment is because I'm a runner, I'm an outdoor athlete, a skier, all things that are driven by our environment, that are empowered by our environment. And if we don't show up and protect it, we're going to stop being able to do those things in one of the best places we have in the entire world to recreate in some of the ways we're able to here. So making sure that you have those moments to go out and do whatever it is you enjoy doing, and if you can turn that into money too, that's huge. And find something that allows you to do that, and you'll be on the right track. So it's great to see people showing up and being passionate about these issues.
Thank you so very much for giving all of your individual insights and stories and perspectives on that question. Thank you. I think that was really insightful. I think we have some time for.
Yeah, we actually ran out of time, but let's give our guests one more round of applause. They'll be sticking around a little bit after, so if you guys do have questions, feel free to come up and talk to them and ask them your questions. But thank you guys for coming out, and have a great rest of your day.